Hello and welcome to another My Art Broker panel discussion. Today's focus is on the David Hockney market. I'm an artist whose insatiable appetite towards perspectives is almost as unquenchable as his market demand. I'm thrilled to be joined today by our guests Helena Poole and Jasper Tordoff, who are both My Art Broker specialists and have extensive experience in buying and selling these works on the secondary market, both in private sales and at auction. Jasper and Helena, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great to have us.
For anyone who hasn't joined before, please do ask questions. There's a tiny little speech bubble at the very bottom of your screen. If you click on that, there's a comment section, and please do ask questions throughout. We've had a couple of panel discussions where this has been absolutely on fire and brilliant for discussion, and a couple where people have been less confident in asking. And we do love all questions. The stupider the better, because those are really easy to answer, aren't they, guys? Right. Where do we start with the David Hockney market? A market that perhaps has evolved through many, many different eras, in his own swimming lane at all times. Jasper, I'm going to start with you, and it's a tough one. Because I'm going to ask you to set the scene for us a little bit. How do we define David Hockney from a historical perspective?
Yeah, thanks. That is a tough one, because perhaps Hockney isn't an artist that you can put in a box, and that's perhaps been part of what's defined his long career that's still going on. He's an artist that has constantly kept recreating himself, has tested new mediums, has had a really long career in the art world. And I think you touched on it, he's an artist that hasn't kept to his own lane, unlike other artists. And so he's almost a bit of a maverick. And I think that's what makes him so interesting. And I think also collectible in a way is that there's so many different periods where he's tried new techniques and has used so many different mediums, which I think makes him really exciting. And his career, just to give you a brief synopsis, it's fascinating in terms of he went to the Bradford College of Arts, subsequently traveled over to the States in the early 60s, which most of was funded by his prints that he made, the early sort of etchings. So the printmaking allowed him to travel to all these places and to really sort of begin his whole artistic career. So it's such a key aspect of Hockney's sort of work that he's produced in his lifetime. So yeah, a maverick is how I would sort of describe him as an artist.
It's quite interesting, the term maverick with David Hockney, because Helena, I don't know if you agree, but it's not the first thing you think of in the sort of art historical canon that David Hockney is a maverick. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, quite possibly. But also he's always been kind of out on a limb almost, viewing things in a different way, seeing things that other people perhaps hadn't seen or valued. You know, when everyone was kind of moving towards, pop art, he was still kind of looking back at, Marquet and other kind of, fauvists at the turn of the century and still appreciating them. Likewise, he loved late Picasso before it was fashionable. He's always been just doing his own thing and really seeing things in his own unique style and kind of exploring that throughout kind of all of the different media accessible to him. So yeah, I guess maverick in a sense, and just kind of, just really kind of seeing things in his own way and not kind of being kind of torn or kind of, shown a different kind of, influenced by the fashions in a sense, just kind of doing his own thing and really kind of doing it in the most kind of exceptional way possible.
It's an interesting path, because you have somebody who it hasn't really been affected dramatically by new movements, I suppose, throughout his career. I mean, somebody who's an extraordinary career of such a length, and also still active today, but also so open to new technologies. Tell us a little bit about that relationship with technology. It's a fascinating one with Hockney, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think. No, you go on, Jasper.
No, you go, honestly.
Well, no, I think, it's often when he kind of sees a medium as being limiting, if you see photography as being limiting and you're only getting kind of one image, it feels kind of very flat. It doesn't feel like the full experience of, say, being surrounded in an Arizona desert. So how do you kind of push that limit and that technology that's available to you till it's very max? So he cuts it up, he plays with perspective, he kind of surrounds us in this kind of very full landscape. And he's always liked technology, I think from kind of early on, in his career, he's kind of really kind of explored kind of the means available to him, in whatever capacity they have. And obviously now the big series is really the iPads, and he's really kind of pushed, what we will probably all just do, paint on our computer, but he's really kind of pushed it to like the maximum extreme that you could do, and to create these kind of huge kind of monumental size pieces.
Mm.
I mean, in his own words, the paintbrush itself is a piece of technology, isn't it? He sees everything that he's given as a tool for the future.
One interesting line on that I find is that he was producing prints when L.S. Lowry was producing prints. And I find that fascinating if you think of sort of the type of works that Lowry produced and the format that he produced them, as opposed to what Hockney was doing, particularly his early lithographs, to then working on the brushes iPad app, which he found that he could then paint faster on an iPad and have more access to color palettes and move faster. It's really amazing. It's very innovative. It's easy for us from our perspective to think it is, but at the time of the 60s and 70s to be thinking about future mediums, it really is innovative in a way.
And I think it doesn't just come from medium, it comes from almost it comes from just an interest in the pictorial image. It's almost, it's not just about, exploring technology, it's being something well in the best way possible, and looking at space and atmosphere, and how do you convey that using kind of the tools available. And perhaps nothing feels quite satisfactory, so he's always on the lookout or on the hunt for kind of a new idea, a new theory, a new kind of app or technology which can kind of lift it one space further into that kind of ultimate form.
And so open to it, and so humble to it. I mean, that's what I think sort of permeates throughout his career, is the openness to accept technology. I mean, even his study of old masters, and saying they were using technology, they were using optics, weren't they, in order to create perspective. And I think that is where we see the maverick in David Hockney. So let's move into the market. And Helena, where are we in the current market with Hockney right now?
I think we've kind of seen really consistent growth over probably the past 10 years, and probably we're at quite a peak moment in the current market with, certain works and themes really, really trending and going for kind of pretty high price points. And, those really kind of the iPads, the big color pieces, as well as kind of obviously the kind of the pool paintings and other kind of series, which we'll probably, delve into a little bit more shortly. But I think, there are also definitely kind of gaps in the market, and actually it's a very accessible market to get into, no matter, within various different budgets, because you've got things which are selling for only a few £1,000s up to hundreds of £1,000s. We've definitely seen an increase on kind of across broad, really, for all of these works, but obviously some have peaked more than others and are currently probably stabilized now, given the results that we've seen at auction.
Jasper, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's quite spot on. And just to add on to a point that you made there, Helena, I think it's really important not to think of David Hockney as these hugely expensive iPad works. That there's also really nice pieces that he produced in late 60s and early 70s, lithographs, etchings, where you can see how the plate's been pressed in, and they're really intricate pieces. And there's a lot of value, I think, still to be had there. I think we saw huge amounts of growth in iPad works, the digital series at auction, particularly over the last year or so. But that said, that the breadth of his work means that there's so many different price points that you can access that at. I think that's a really important thing because it appeals to all collectors coming in at all different price points. But yeah, the market's definitely very strong at the moment for Hockney prints throughout.
And so access points, Jasper, how low is accessible? You know, a lot of people will think of Hockney as a multi-million-pound artist. And what I think what's interesting about him is he's primarily a printmaker. So whereas, you know, a lot of the artists that we specialize in, by buying a print, it's brilliant, it's accessible, you've got a comparable data market, but you are buying into the print market of an artist that perhaps is better known for original paintings. How does that affect his market, and how low can someone access this market?
Definitely, it's really important not to overlook Hockney's printmaking. It allowed him to travel the world and become the artist that he has through selling of those. You can pick up signed Hockney pieces from quite large editions for £3,000 to £5,000 at auction houses, and I think a lot of people don't realise that. I would say then sort of like some of the later lithographs typically trade from sort of £10,000 to £30,000, and then the iPads generally come in slightly more, all the way up to £30,000 to £100,000. And then they've got a later series that he did called The Arrival of Spring, which typically trade anywhere from, say, £100,000 to £300,000. So really a broad range, and I think any collector coming into the space can sort of pick and choose which works they'd like to collect, which is really nice. But I think a lot of people don't realise how cheaply these can be bought. They're signed limited edition prints, which I think is great.
Great. I've got a great question coming in from the floor. What would be a good one to get for 5K as an investment? It's a difficult one, right? Because of course the most investable series are ones that started a little bit higher, perhaps slightly later in his career. What would you advise?
It's a very tricky one, but there are some results that have been kind of recently seen kind of for full sets, like for Arake's Progress, or kind of other, kind of the Grimm's fairy tale series. And, these works were produced kind of at his peak period. He kind of took a whole year out of kind of creating, the pool paintings just to make the Grimm's fairy tale series. And they're probably, transacting some of them around, £5,000. And you can certainly kind of pick these up at various, speak to us, various other auction houses too. And they're kind of really, really wonderful pieces. And yeah, for Arake's Progress, the complete set, I think at Christie's last year, it sold all in for like over £430,000. So you can get one of those pieces from this much larger series at a really, really affordable price point. And, then people might want to complete their edition. People are wanting to, collect in all kinds of different ways. I mean, you can then kind of grow your own and have your own full set and, hopefully match up some numbers if you can. And that would be a really kind of interesting entry point into the market for something which has also had this kind of really successful recent auction result too.
Mm-hmm. I think there's so much that's at that level in the Hockney market. Is there a particular area that someone should be looking? This question was geared around investment. Is there a series that perhaps is a good place to start? I mean, one of the great things about the website is you can go online and you can use the price filter and have a really good look at Hockney's output by price and value at the current market. Is there a particular series that you might look at?
Grimm's fairy tales is definitely, and I really like that approach of trying to collect them, different edition numbers, and you could really build something there. And they are very liquid. There's quite a few on the market, and they're popping up at regional auction houses almost all the time. I looked at recently. There's a series that around Hockney's sort of muses, which I think is a really important part of Hockney's work. And typically you can pick these up sub £10,000. Now these are works with colour. They're from a signed edition. The edition sizes aren't massive. One of the pieces that springs to mind is Portrait of a Mother. And there's sort of other works that involve Celia, which is one of Hockney's main muses. And these can be picked up under sort of £8,000, probably nearer to £5,000 on a good day. And I think they're really nice pieces. They've got a lot of colour, and of course they're signed in edition by Hockney. So I think there's still a lot of value in works like that. But again, I like Helena's idea of trying to collect a whole series individually. I think that would be quite a fun thing to do.
I think, I mean, David Hockney is known for his sort of innovation and experimentation with various mediums and techniques, which is probably what makes this conversation that much more complex, and perhaps also another reason to have a one-to-one conversation with a specialist if it's something that you're looking at as a first, as a first piece, a first investment to collection. How do you think that versatility has influenced the market for his prints? Helena?
I mean, I think that just means that there's something out there for everyone, kind of no matter your taste, no matter your kind of aesthetic that you're going for. Hockney's kind of so, I guess he's so easy to like and likable, and there's always going to be something there, from a simple kind of black and white line drawing of just a person distilled into something kind of far more complex, verging on abstraction into the 1980s, something with lots of fun and color and movement, kind of capturing that side of his life. And I think you can really buy into both him, throughout all of these different kind of explorations. You can really buy into him as an artist, as a person, about where he's living, and kind of get a sense of him and his story. I think he's someone who's just fascinated by the world, and so is bringing all of that kind of into his art in so many different ways.
Such a perfect explanation, and yet also distinctive Hockney, distinctively Hockney, regardless of the variation within his portfolio. I want to just touch a little more on the evolution of his style and medium, and perhaps more recently into the iPad series. But Jasper and Helena, both of you had quite a lot of experience in this market in more recent years. What was the reception of the iPad drawings when they first appeared on the scene?
It's funny because this is a piece that you, until fairly recently, you could buy directly from the publishers. The price is sort of, nobody knows the exact sort of price, but all of a sudden the market erupted, and on the secondary market these pieces were making new auction records and selling way above the high estimate quite regularly. So the market really took to them, which is very interesting. And again, privately these were probably being sold for slightly more, and the demand privately was huge. I think 2022, 2023, there were some record prices for these pieces. So they really came to the market with quite a bang, and people that had bought them from release were likely cashing in very quickly by selling these pieces privately.
I think though, when the exhibition happened at the RA, the Bigger Picture show in 2012, Hockney had been in LA, prior to that. He was welcomed back because everyone loves him here, with open arms. But actually, I don't think anyone quite expected at that moment in time these pieces to really take off like they did. And actually, there were quite a few articles kind of criticizing them, feeling like they were lacking in some way, not capturing kind of the world in the way that people wanted to see it at that time. I think everyone was kind of buoyed up by Hockney in the Olympic Games, and he was such a British kind of national figure. But I don't think that they really had the same. They didn't take off initially on the market until kind of slightly later on, until we started, and then we were kind of really saw the results at auction really begin to take off.
I think that sort of reception of something that is so, I think he said it started in the caves and it's now in the iPads, and now we're sort of 5 years further than that. We've gone through the NFT boom, and it's like, would have Hockney got involved in that, had he been a little younger? It's a really interesting one. They're also the size of them is quite monumental. People don't realize how enormous they are, how much impact they can have. I remember seeing them in the flesh for the first time and thinking, oh my God, they're enormous. This artist that you're quite accustomed to being relatively smaller scale, unless we're talking about the enormous works, the paintings. There's an accessibility there, isn't there, that I think that this market appreciates because it's the print market.
Yeah, I think it's also, when you're looking at these through a computer screen, you don't really get the effect. I remember the first time seeing them, and it was like, wow, he's using sort of size to have a real impact, and it makes a massive difference. You're looking at these huge sort of landscapes, and yeah, with the color sort of really sharply created on an iPad, which I don't think you can really create through printmaking. It's sort of screen printing, it might get dulled down slightly. So you're looking at like these bold, sharp colours that are just sort of bursting off. And yeah, it's a kind of surreal experience. It's really nice to be able to see these in the flesh. And we spend so long looking at these through a computer screen, but the impact of seeing them in real life, it really does make a difference. It does sort of change sort of the way you think about them.
Yeah. And I think you say, obviously Hockney hasn't embraced NFTs, but he's certainly embraced other aspects of, I suppose, like technology with the, the bigger and closer exhibition at the Light, and, having that kind of full immersive experience into his world. He's certainly kind of explored it kind of visually and in kind of representing it to the audience in various different ways, not just the traditional, I suppose, gallery setting, which is kind of the most, not always the most accessible for people, but really kind of tried to move beyond that to play with space and how things are kind of, and how his visual world is kind of interpreted and seen by everyone.
I mean, that exhibition was sort of the ultimate piece at that time, wasn't it? I mean, when you look at other immersive exhibitions where the artists had nothing to do with the experience, to know that you could walk into Hockney's world and it was something that he endorsed and that he collaborated on was something quite extraordinary. Iconic series and their market impact. We have a few questions from prior to the panel on this. We have to talk about pools because it's just probably the most iconic image when one thinks of David Hockney. And I do want to talk a little bit about that market, but the question we had was, what are the market differences between something such as pools and perhaps his landscapes and portraits? I suppose what we can really answer there is liquidity. Like, if you were to buy into some of these major iconic series, are you going to find it easier to pass on to the next generation and sell than perhaps some of his smaller, less well-known series? Jasper.
Yeah, the pools, undoubtedly, if you track sort of Hockney's market and sales recently and historically, what you can really see is a trend, which is the seminal works. So this is obviously the pool series. Probably the most commonly known piece would be the paper pools that he did in 1980 from the edition of 1000. So you mentioned liquidity. These do come up to auction quite frequently, and I think they get sold privately much more. I mean, we sell these quite quickly, and they're really nice pieces. There's also other works, so the lithographs of water, and there's variations in terms of the light washes and colours and the sort of pencil lines. Now, these are slightly smaller edition pieces, but much larger. And this is real seminal work. This is sort of like the prize collector's piece if you're sort of buying into the Hockney etchings, etc. And what I think these allow us to do is to really see where the Hockney market is, because these sort of price points give a really nice comparable of what's happening. And if we look quite recently, there was a sale at Christie's and Phillips, respectively, of the edition of 1,000 paper pools. And one of them made $80,000 and the other one made $40,000. So, which I think was a record. I believe 80,000 was a record for that piece. So gives a real good idea of where the market is, where the market has been. And I think these seminal works can really give an indication of how well Hockney's pieces are doing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, think like Jasper, anything with a kind of pool water imagery, I mean, it just is so evocative of Hockney that it's always going to have a transactional value. For me, I find, I guess, more interesting to look at it more in terms of, rather than just like one particular series which is focused on water, I like to look at it more in terms of where he is at the time, and in terms of kind of place too. I think that's a kind of an interesting thing to look at in terms of where he was producing, what he was making during that period of time. We've obviously got kind of the hot years are kind of those from like 1965 to 1975, and prior to that, the 1960 to 1965 period, I think those were often kind of more overlooked pieces, both in the print market as well as in the kind of in the drawings and paintings. Stylistically, people haven't really kind of caught on to them yet. I think from the 1980s and 1990s, still, I think, we've still got kind of big prices achieved for, largely the focus has been on either the American landscapes or American portraits, or also kind of the Yorkshire, Arrival of Spring series, but actually kind of works from France, from Normandy. He's still releasing these pictures. We haven't really seen them come so much onto the market. And there's kind of quite an interesting result a few years ago of actually a painting from 1968 to 1969 of Sainte Maxime in France. And it was really unusual work, and it went for 20 million, over 20 million pounds, with an estimate I think it was of 7 to 10 million. And just to seeing kind of changes in the market in that way, and kind of different things being valued in that French space perhaps is now beginning to pick up more. Which, maybe been overlooked. Hockney's actually, he lives in Normandy. He spent kind of 1973 to 1975 in France, and we shouldn't really forget that.
I mean, there is, as you say, I mean, it sounds too simplistic, but there's just something for everybody. I mean, the exciting thing about Hockney's market is that there's a period that will resonate with you, isn't there? There's a location, a sense of place, or a period, or a subject matter. We've talked a lot about what affects value. We talked about Hockney's reputation and artistic significance. What are the other things perhaps to look at in terms of what affects value? So a Hockney work comes in. What do you guys look for immediately to assess the value of something?
Oh, there's so many, Charlotte. It really is. One of the to sort of belt and braces, I think, provenance for starters, to make sure this work is authentic, and to make sure that it has a full provenance. Provenance is where the work has come from. It's always nice to be able to track it from the publishers, so in the form of receipts, etc. This does two things. It can increase the value because having a nice provenance adds a nice story to something, and also ensures that the work is authentic. Secondly, particularly with Hockney's earlier works, is condition. It's not going to be such an issue with the later iPads that he began in 2010, but condition, because these works, when they were produced in the 60s, 70s and 80s, unfortunately, conservation grade framing wasn't around. So sadly, quite a few of these have sort of become victims of poor framing, which can cause condition issues.
When Hockney's experimenting with media as well, the printing technology of kind of photography and things, it's not always kind of the same as digital photography or giclée printing now. And so that also had kind of a knock-on effect in terms of fading of certain pieces of the photo montages, for instance, and things like that.
It's exactly, and I don't think you'll ever find, particularly with the photo collages, in my experience, particularly speaking to some collectors that have been collecting a long time, you won't find pieces that look as if they've been printed. It's part of the charm of these pieces being 30, 40 years old. The inks were different back then, the paper types were different, and that's a really important thing to consider. Works in better condition, they're going to achieve a better price, but works in poor condition, if they're priced accordingly, can be good purchases. Again, these pieces have had a long life as well, most of
them. In terms of condition, if I was to buy a Hockney print, how should I keep it in order for it to hold its value? And that probably depends dramatically upon what era I've bought from.
I would say get a, if you'll have a condition report, like provided to you when you buy it, so you kind of can understand the condition and if any treatment needs to take place. And then, there's, museum quality framing, acid-free backing board, make sure it's kind of framed well, go to someone who's, able, who does museum quality kind of conservation and framing and uses all of those techniques. And then still, don't put it in, your kind of a bright sunlit place. But, that will kind of keep it at a kind of a good and constant level.
I've got a question come in. Oh, I'm going to put you on the spot with this one. I have a Sumo Bigger Book Art Edition D with accompanying iPad drawing. Is there an upper limit on the value?
I believe it's that number 329. It's helpful. There's different ways of characterizing those with A, B, C, or D, or all the numbers. So if perhaps you can elaborate on the number, that would help.
Maybe perhaps something to discuss afterwards. Views on the Blue Guitar series seems to be gathering interest.
I mean, I love the Blue Guitar series. As a big Picasso fan, Hockney also, loves Picasso. I think he, yeah, as I said, he loved late Picasso before anyone else liked late Picasso. He's always, been inspired by Picasso and what he was doing. I mean, when he moved to France in 1973, obviously Picasso has then just passed away. I mean, Hockney then made two commemorative etchings, with about his relationship with the artist. One with him standing by this bust of Picasso's head, and the other of him kind of sitting at a table, him a young man opposite this kind of, Picasso as a more elderly figure. And I think he saw what Picasso did and was doing, and really it really resonated with him. I think in a way he kind of, when he moved at that time, he was kind of felt like he was missing that kind of last kind of 20th century kind of Parisian life in that kind of 1970s period. And actually he was probably the last guard of it. He was kind of the last one to be carrying it on, living that kind of Parisian bohemian lifestyle. But maybe, I don't know if he realized it at the time, but he certainly kind of is his kind of relationship to Picasso, I think, is probably one of the most significant ones of his career. And so, yeah, I love that Blue series. That would definitely be one of my, if I could buy a series, that would definitely be one up there for me.
Do you think there's any other artist that has influenced Hockney significantly other than Picasso?
I mean, I think there are a lot of the Fauvists, a lot of the Impressionists. I think if you're looking at, turn of the century, and Marquet, at Dufy, at the colorists, I think all of those really kind of informed his take. And he liked great painters and seeing, really great works. I mean, obviously he also, there was a period where he was very interested in Dubuffet, but that was probably kind of more fleeting and short-lived. And I think since then, he's also kind of had kind of, pop influences and drawn from that kind of wider culture that he was certainly part of in LA. I mean, I think that, he's had such a long and varied career that there's kind of undoubtedly kind of so many influences. But I also think, when you're looking at Hockney, he's also been quite interested, inspired by kind of Japanese art, the flattening of forms, kind of, Asian ideas of abstraction. There's so many kind of different varied things and theories that have informed his kind of output, not just artists as well, like kind of philosophers too.
If the Weather series springs to mind, 1973, Works Like Snow, where he's sort of playing around with the different sort of planes of perspective and informed by the sort of Japanese wood block printing technique. So many different things that Hockney sort of has taken and looked at and sort of incorporates into his own work. It's really fascinating.
Never have I wanted more that we had another screen with the artworks we're talking about, by the way. The visual reference is you can feel it, when you talk about these works in a way that perhaps you don't with other markets. Another question. We've got loads of questions coming in, so I'm going to throw them at you before we start going back into sort of future predictions. What time are we on? Oh goodness. Okay. Which series seem to have reached their peak? Reached their peak.
It's a really good question. If to draw on one series, I would say The Arrival of Springs. I think the market is softening slightly for these works. If we're basing it purely on auction results, which I know is dangerous to do, as we all know, that only gives a small glimpse into the actual art market of prints and multiples. But I do think in 2022, 2020, sort of early 2023, the market, there was auction records being made all the time. And subsequently, when these have hit the market, although they haven't been that popular, there hasn't been too many to market, they have sort of hammered at low estimates. So will it go back there? I still think so, but I do think it might take a bit of time, and the market is quite deflated.
And I would say that that's also like slightly an auction house estimating strategy, is that back a few years ago they weren't being priced so high, the auction estimates were so high, and now they're not having the same competition against estimate. And actually competition against estimate in an auction is what leads to the highest results. And actually by pricing things higher, you don't always necessarily achieve something well beyond kind of the high estimate in terms of hammer price. So that's a kind of a strategy too that auction houses have to manage in terms of meeting clients' expectations, and also then wanting the works to really fly. But I would agree with Jasper as well that those works have probably kind of reached a peak, and we're not quite seeing those same levels achieved that we did a few years ago for those works.
But we're still seeing demand. We're so used to seeing certain things going up. I think that's the game we play with auction, and we have to be very aware of those pricing strategies, exactly as Helena says. So here's a question that you won't want to answer because it's asking you to look at your crystal ball. But which series do you think are far from their peak? Which ones are you seeing a huge amount of interest from collectors and of course in the public auction market?
That's a tricky one. I still think there's a huge amount. I know I keep on going on about this. There's still a loads of value with the early etchings that he's done. I feel like Hockney's almost an artist where everyone's taking a huge amount of interest in the iPad works, and that's great. And it might, in future lines, that might become some of his seminal works. Number 329, I think, is a great piece. But
is there a rediscovery going on, Jasper, of because of the attention to his more current works? Is there a rediscovery going on that we're feeling in the market with collectors?
I think so. I mean, if you're, in terms of value for money, I really strongly think that you're actually getting something that's created by a studio. You can see there's much more craft that goes into that, as opposed to, say, an iPad piece just been signed by David Hockney. They're great, but in terms of that's really old school printmaking. I think there's a huge value, and where they're sort of hammering at the moment and selling out privately. I think it's almost a bargain, and I think given the prices that his later work is making, there's no reason why we can't see an increase. But I don't have a crystal ball. But that's just what I think.
Good try. Question that's come in just now. HSX Hiscox 2024 report that David Hockney is now ranked second after being at the top last year. It's always fascinating to see changes in the market like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what might be influencing this shift. Ooh, I've got lots of comments about the Hiscox report that would make that a little bit less of a statement, perhaps. But yeah, shift. Where has the shift been very recently, and what is affecting that, do you think?
After you, Helena.
I'm just trying to fully understand the question. I was just I
think this is a Hiscox report that Hockney was number one in terms of the most investable artist in the, I think, in 2023. This is a downgrading of David Hockney in 2024. I mean, perhaps to start with, we have to be very careful with this data, don't we? Because it's aggregating a huge amount of data to look at an entire market, and essentially setting up a sort of an index of an artist and looking at their market across every single medium there is, which when you average it out isn't particularly useful.
No, and I think, whether or not Hockney is one or two, he's still kind of hugely investable and the artist of our generation. I mean, there are so many kind of opportunities there, in his market to invest in at so many different price points. I think, this kind of Yayoi Kusama is number one this year, and I believe, and I don't think there is even, I think in the Kusama market, there are some kind of lower value things, but kind of the output isn't nearly as varied as Hockney, and it doesn't kind of appeal to the same kind of with breadth of, diverse, number of collectors as kind of Hockney is able to do. And he's still producing kind of new works released last year, hopefully more will be released this year. There's still kind of this kind of very kind of fresh and dynamic output where he's still engaged, talking about his works, producing. Yes, he has a kind of assistants to help him, but these are all still being kind of done, by him in his studio in Normandy, kind of sitting there, kind of still in love with the world, in love with the light, in love with the rain, whatever it may be. And it remains a hugely kind of investable figure that people love and want to own if they can a piece of.
I mean, in a way, would you say that that actually makes, sorry to be so crude about it, but it makes them a relatively good bet from an investment perspective, doesn't it? Because it means that you're not buying, not only if you buy into prints and multiples, are you able to sort of diversify and spread that investment across more artworks. But with Hockney, because there's so much diversity, he's not a one-trick pony, is he? He's got so much to his output, his oeuvre, that actually the ability to be able to collect Hockney is a much more, it's a much safer established market in that respect than perhaps urban and contemporary. Would you argue that?
I think so.
He's successful since he left art school. He's been marketed and on the market, as an upcoming artist. He's sold and been involved in the art world and been hugely successful kind of throughout his career. There's kind of he's been winning competitions from a young age, but also being bought by big collectors from such a young age and involved with that. I think it's a career that's only ever had legs and will continue to do so, and a market that will only continue to do so.
He's a national treasure, and because it's such a liquid market and such a comparable market, you can have a pretty good idea if you stay in tuned with sort of what's been happening privately and also at auction. You can have a pretty good idea as to where your portfolio sits in terms of value wise, and like you touched on, Charlotte, because there's so many different, you've got iPads, you've got etchings, you've got photo collage works. You can really sort of be exposed to different markets, which I think is quite nice. And perhaps comparably to an urban, let's say Banksy, you can't necessarily do that. You've got sort of unsigned and signed works, and then you've got perhaps the original pieces. So Hockney gives you a really nice, broad way of picking out works that he's produced throughout the years.
Here's a question that you might already have answered. It's from what they call themselves a midweight collector of Hockney's work. Are there any emerging trends that they should be aware of? What trends are you seeing in the private market at the moment?
From a demand perspective, which I think could be quite valuable to a collector, huge demand for paper pulls. We can't get enough of them. I wish the edition was 2,000 and not 1,000. You think there would be more. So real sort of trends for the seminal pieces. So collectors perhaps towards the end of their collecting phase that want to get the major works by David Hockney. We're seeing huge demand for those. Again, a lot of demand for iPads. Unfortunately, these were quite relatively small editions. So yeah, that really seems to be the trend that's been happening for the last 3 months.
Is that scarcity, Jasper? Is that down to scarcity, or are there other dynamics at play?
It's difficult. I think a lot of people that are holding these don't necessarily have to sell. There's an element that because Hockney's market is performing quite strongly, that they can wait until the prices increase. That said, no one knows what the future is going to have. Markets can move quickly upwards and quickly downwards. So yeah, it's not, if you look at the iPads, they're actually quite big edition sizes, particularly the bigger book series. So it's not necessarily demand, supply. It's perhaps just people aren't looking to sell these at the moment, unless they sort of have to. So that's probably what we're seeing. But we're seeing a huge demand privately, which I think is always a good time to sell when that's the case.
Helena, would you agree with those?
Yeah, I would totally agree with those. And I think, other ones from that kind of 1970s period, the Weather series particularly obviously missed huge demand for that work. Things which are just kind of aesthetic, atmospheric. I mean, they really kind of strike a chord with people. I'd say, yeah, not just, obviously not just kind of paper pulls, but just kind of the wider pool series, kind of, as I said, almost anything with that kind of fluidity, that kind of watery imagery, people just really, they're just kind of hot items at the moment that people really love. It just makes people feel like they can have a kind of piece of Hockney on their wall, with, and it's so recognizably Hockney as well that kind of people really love that too.
I think also it's so important to watch what's happening in the public auction space at the same time as talking to somebody in the private market, because so often you see an artwork that it's almost promoted by going through auction, but it might not be one of the better ones from the series, and everyone sort of attaches the relevance to it. the weather series at the moment is, a bit of a new discovery for people. I think, it's something that doesn't immediately spring to mind. And once something has been seen a few times at auction, suddenly there's a bit of a hype around it, isn't there? How should perhaps a collector who owns something which is coming up at auction, what should be their strategy if they're thinking about selling?
I've had this conversation quite recently with a client of mine that usually exercises selling works via auction, but I always think, particularly, again, going back to the statistic that only 33% of sales via auction account for the prints and multiples market, it's such a key fact. Because what I think you can do is exercise the selling privately, i.e. you're not going to burn your artwork. Perhaps you can get a slightly higher price. We can test the market at a higher price. That you've really got nothing to lose in that regard. So you can go out privately, and if you can't achieve a private sale, auctions are going nowhere. That there's always going to be sales. You've got to make sure you get the right advice to put it into the right sale, particularly if it's a weather series set, something that really rarely comes up to auction, that would fetch quite a large number. So yeah, always advise clients to exercise a private sale before going into auctions. Christie's and Sotheby's, Phillips and Bonhams are going nowhere. They've been around a very long time, so that's always a sort of a good exit strategy should a private sale not be achieved.
And I mean, you've got nothing to lose, have you, if you come to us particularly? Okay. So last question before we move on to a little bit at the end, which is always a bit more fun. For someone looking to start collecting Hockney prints, we've talked a little bit about probably some relatively, industry level stuff around how, 33% of the prints market is sold at auctions. The rest of it happens offline. Where does it happen? How should they approach the marketplace? They want to buy, they walk into perhaps a high street gallery and they're shown a Hockney. They go online and they see something coming up in auction. They come to my art broker and see the marketplace and the fact that there's access to one. What are the different variables there and how should they approach it without being too biased to my art broker?
I mean, I think you're presenting so many different platforms on which to buy, each with, I suppose, different ways of navigating. I think, you look for opportunities. If you understand the price from multiple different sources, you can then, really kind of have a picture. Hopefully our auction data right at the bottom of our kind of website will give you kind of guidance on what's going on auction for that piece. Our value indicator incorporates kind of more data than that. Give us a call. We can kind of walk you through, what really kind of all of that data does. And then just, I suppose, as well as understanding kind of where the prices are for their work and the condition, what's the provenance of the work from the gallery? Are they providing a condition report for the piece? Don't be scared to ask the questions. Can I see the piece out of the frame? Can I see a picture of the back of the work? How has it been framed? How has it been stored? All of those questions are so helpful because you're taking on a piece that you love, but also perhaps a piece that you're looking at as an investment, and just be sure that you have kind of all of the information to hand, before you're really making that purchase. There are so many kind of different options out there, and it's nice to just try and get as much clarity as you can. And we can just happy to kind of answer the phone and kind of talk through kind of all options actually, with people when they're kind of looking to make those initial kind of first purchases and move into kind of the process of collecting.
Which is something I feel that we're doing more and more at the moment. I feel like the demographic of perhaps the Hockney market has changed since I've been in the art world. The demographic of the Hockney buyers and collectors was a lot older 10 years ago than it is now. There seems to be a new emerging. Why do you think that's because of things like the iPad drawings, which I feel like we've given a huge amount of credit to in this panel? Or do you think it's impact of exhibitions and retrospectives? Is it actually just the natural curve of the art market, which is now attracting particularly the prints market, which is attracting a new generation of buyers and sellers?
I think it's definitely, Hockney's quite Instagrammable. I hate to say it, but I think that does make a huge difference. People on the weekend will go to these exhibitions. They'll learn more about the markets and figure out doesn't cost £100,000 to buy a Hockney. And I think that's a really nice way of new collectors coming into the space. Then they get exposed to other printmakers and other, it's a whole ecosystem, the prints and multiples market. So I think that's got an element to do with it. I think the sort of recent sort of transparency of data and looking at art as an alternative way to diversify a portfolio, I think has brought perhaps a new type of collector to the space as well. But I've seen it across all other markets as well. The Lowry market, which you would perhaps see as there's a traditional buying type, but yeah, I've seen that change recently. So yeah, I think it's the whole element of the prints and multiples market becoming more transparent and open to new collectors buying various printmakers' works. I guess.
Yeah, and I think yeah,
Gen should be Gen Z and Larry should be our next panel discussion, Jasper.
That'd be great.
Sorry, Helena, go on.
No, well, I was just saying that, I think also, he's a British national treasure. Like no one else could, go and meet King in Crocs and get like headline news. We've always in the UK had like a lead artist figure, from, Francis Bacon, then Freud, and Hockney's taken on that kind of baton. And, he is kind of the artist of our generation, and he there's no one really like him. So if you're looking to buy someone with a kind of an established career who's also still making works and is, a really just kind of wonderful cultural icon, I don't think it really matters the age or the demographic. I just think probably it's that, people at kind of certain ages are able to afford different things, and so of looking to diversify their assets. And I think especially after the pandemic, there was a real move into, diversifying assets in certain ways, and perhaps more of the younger generation kind of moved into the market in that way. And yeah, of course, as Jasper says, the big images and the bold colors also kind of really help with kind of the contemporary aesthetic.
Quick question before we wrap up. A question I don't really want to ask, but it has been asked a couple of times. How could Hockney's death affect his market?
This comes up
a lot.
Often.
Yeah.
Not just with David Hockney, sadly with Bridget Riley and other artists as well. It's funny, I've got a sort of an anecdote that I was speaking to a good client of mine about the Warhol Mick Jagger series, of which there is an element of when an artist dies, it's going to increase in value, but that isn't always the case. I mean, sometimes it can actually have quite a negative impact on the market. Much of these markets, as we've discussed, are dominated by supply and demand. If there is 80% of the collectors of David Hockney thinking the market's going to increase, and they all put their works into auction or private sale, there's an element of the demand's just going to look like too much supply to reach the demand. So it can have a negative impact. So I don't have a ball again, but if I had to guess, I would say it would have the immediate impact would be negative on the market's price. I would guess. Bold claim, but I do think, yeah.
But I think also, longer term, there are so many kind of, I guess, different factors. As I said, Hockney's always had, a career, from the moment he left art school. So that will only undoubtedly continue, whether or not the market kind of falls and rises in the very kind of short term, is hard to say. But I think, we've also got to look at it in comparison to other artists like late Picasso's. Like 2009, no one really wanted late Picasso's. And now, other than Hockney, who loved them, but now they're having a real resurgence. So I think, it depends on your kind of trajectory and your time frame, because I think that these things will only have legs. It's just whether or not what point you want to sell.
I think that's an excellent answers. Bold claim from Jasper, excellent answers. I think there's a sort of belief that it will all suddenly happen because supply runs out, but also you don't know what else is out there in the market. And exactly as you say, sometimes the media of such a moment can create, you see what happened in the Banksy market when the supply became limited. Suddenly then everybody went to market at the same time. I think the point is that we would always suggest, it's holding time, isn't it? And if you're buying a Hockney and looking to turn a profit just after death. That's not a particularly intelligent way to go about collecting in this market. But you know, these as you say, they have legs, and it's about holding time. Right, we're almost out of time. Final question I always ask: if you were to buy one Hockney work for love and one Hockney work for investment, what would you choose and why? I didn't let these guys in this room.
I think that one work I just really love, can I go for the entire weather series? Because I think together they have a really, that could be my investment too. I think together they just have a really nice discourse, and he uses so many different kind of printmaking techniques. He's informed by, I guess, his like 1970s trip to Japan, which I obviously, love. And then he's got, all of these kind of different ways of looking at atmosphere and weather in all of these different techniques that create like a really kind of interesting dialogue about him as an artist and him as like a person exploring the world and traveling and looking at other artworks and kind of in his relation to that. So that's probably what I would choose.
For both love and investment potential. Good choice.
I think it's a great investment. I think it's a great investment potential. Now, I already said all of the early works. I think the Grimm's fairy tales, those ones too. Perfect.
Great choices. I would, purely because I think it's a really nice image. It's one of these works so Celia with green plant. It's early sort of lithograph. Just really like the image. And then if I had to, for an investment based on sort of recent sales, it would be one of the Poole series. I would imagine in terms of liquidity, the addition of 1,000 would be a slightly better one to go for. The exit strategy would be easier because if you go into the lithographs of green washed, they're a little bit more expensive. So I would buy paper pools at the best possible price that I could if I run and sit on it for 10 years and see what happens. That's what I would do.
Brilliant, guys. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. You're both so knowledgeable. Please do, there's a few questions that have come through that we haven't been able to get to. Please do email us. You can get to Jasper at jasper@myartbroker or Helena at Helena@myartbroker. Might have added your surname, but otherwise info helena.poole@myartbroker.com. Jasper, are you still jasper@myartbroker.com?
Yeah, just jasper@myartbroker.com.
Brilliant. And we would love to discuss any of those further questions with you. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Bye-bye.